Really quickly, if you're going to be beading eventually on any type of leather, especially commercial leather, it's a little stiffer and harder. So to get your needle through your beads and the needle through, you may need to use a plier and grasp the needle and pull it through. Otherwise, you will experience a lot of broken needles trying to do that without a plier. So now we're going to get started. You should all have some materials in front of you. You should have a plate or a dish or some sort of beading tray, depending on the colors you're choosing. I have a variety of dark green to light green beads, so I selected a white beading plate so that they would be more visible, because it's so important to really take care of your eyes when you're doing this work, because you can get very fatigued and you really want to eliminate eye strain. So have a beading plate or tray, select your beads, have a needle and some thread and a little scissors, and then what we call interfacing. Now interfacing comes in a variety of thicknesses, and I tend to purchase mine at Joann Fabric. I don't know the dimension of this, thickness of this. It's like a medium grade interfacing. You definitely don't want it too thin and flimsy though. So it's got a little stiffness to it. Sort of feels like stiff cardboard almost, but very easy to bead through it. If you do not have interfacing, you could use another type of material also. So the first step when you're going to do applique beadwork, if you are not going to bead directly onto the item like this jacket, and you're going to bead on something like interfacing, you want to draw your pattern. So I'm not the greatest freehand drawer, so Jason is usually tasked with this. And so he drew me just a simple leaf. And so once you draw your pattern, and if you have difficulties with that, I've even printed little pictures off the internet and then printed them onto paper and traced it on to my item as well. And you can use a pen, you can use a pencil, a colored pencil, anything that will create your pattern. Once you have your pattern, you are ready to start beading. So let's get started. So what you will need to do first and foremost is thread your needle, and I've already pre-threaded mine, so I will give you a second to thread yours just in case. And for those who have already threaded and are waiting and ready to go, please go ahead and give us a like or a love, share our video, do a live feed if you have the ability, and give us some hearts, some love. And next step, what we're going to do, once you've threaded your needle, we are going to create a knot at the end of the string. And I do about, this thread is very thin, so I'm going to do 4 knots to make sure it's thick enough. Sometimes 3 will suffice depending on your thread. And once you have your knot secured at the end, we are ready to bead. Now the beads that we typically use are size 11 beads. You can use any size, you know, that is your preference. But the higher the number of the size of the beads, typically the smaller the beads. So I found a tube just a little while ago. It was size 15 and they were quite tiny. So I'm sticking for tonight with the size 11s. They're a pretty good, easy size for beginner beadwork to learn. So we are going to start with simple line work. Now to do that, I've already started the line work already, and what I want to show you and explain to you is that when I am beading on applique, I always bead the outside first. So I've done over half of it, and I intentionally stopped here. So this is where we will resume. Now, whatever pattern you've drawn, if you have any curves to it, I would suggest sticking to the straightest part of your pattern for the beginning steps, and then we'll get into more intricate patterns as we go along. So what you will want to do, depending on where your pattern starts, is come up either, you know, at the edge of your design, or if you're midway into some beadwork yourself. I'm just going to pretend that this is where my line starts, and I'm going to bring up my needle right next to the beads, because what I'm going to do is, depending where my thread lands, I'm going to feed it through the nearest bead and the entire row, so that once I pull the thread through, I am ready to go. As you can see, the thread is leading out from the bottom bead. Now I'm ready to start putting some beads on my needle. Now when I do straight line work, I only do 3 to 4 beads at a time. You can do more than that, but what I've noticed is when you put several, sometimes it can feel a little loose, or beads can move a little bit, and so I like to take my time, so I tend to use less beads, but it's your preference. For tonight, we'll stick with 3 for the line work. So with my design, I typically go with the darker color for the edging. So I have a really flat dark green bead that I'm using for my edging of this leaf. So I've picked up 3 beads on my needle, and you're going to let them fall right flush and flat to the surface of your interfacing. You're going to hold your thumb over the beads, take your needle and push it down right next to the end of the last bead. Pull it through, and it's good to pinch it because you'll lose your thread. Pull it through so it's nice and secure, and then hold those beads in place, and you're going to come up with your needle right next to either the second to the last or the last bead that was beaded on. Mine ended up near the last 2 beads, so I'm going to take my needle and slide it through those 2 beads. So again, my needle is coming through and out from the last bead. And I do this, I refer to this as securing your beads. You always want to secure them. Now, we've put on 3 beads so far, so we're going to put on another 3. So I got 3 beads. I'm going to lower the beads. You can see they're lined up right next to and on the line, on the pattern, right next to the other beads. I'm going to place my thumb, hold them in place, and stick my needle right through, right next to the final bead. Slide my thread through. You can see it's quite secure. Take my needle, come up from underneath, bring it up, and I'm right near the end again. I'm going to pull my thread through, and again I ended up next to the second to the last bead, so I'm going to put my needle through that bead and the last bead. I'm having a little bit of difficulty to see here. The lights are bright, but here we go. The last 2 beads. Hold it in place. Slide your thread through. As you can see, I'm moving down the line ever so cautiously. So some people, when they bead, they use a beeswax to coat their thread. I don't use it, so I mean, if you prefer to use it, great. I don't find that my thread gets tangled when I don't use it. I just use a thread that's not too long, that it to prevent it from getting tangled. So we will do one more of the 3 bead stitch, and then turn it over to Jason here in a minute. So if you follow along, grab your 3 beads. Bring them down. Again, hold them in place with your thumb. press your needle through. Pull the string all the way. And then come up through. Now the thing about beadwork, every once in a while, you may make a mistake. You may end up pulling your needle a little bit too far from your desired area, and it may end up bunching the beads or something like that. That's okay. Just take your needle off the thread and pull out that stitch that you did and just redo it. It happens every once in a while. So I'm pulling my thread up through, and I'm going to run my needle through the 2 beads and make my way down once again. And it's in place. Now let's say I was done beading, or I wanted to start working on another area, because I will once you come back to me shortly here. So you can leave it like that, or you can take your needle, poke it through the end of the last bead, right through the interfacing, like what I'm doing here, and then just make a little knot. And secure it right flush against your interfacing. And I do about two knots. And then if you plan on resuming in another area, just snip your thread, create another knot, which I'll be doing shortly because I'll be showing you another area, and then you're good to go elsewhere on your applique. So, rest of this leaf. And what I had done was started at the very edge and stayed right next to the edge of the beads, and again repeating that 3 bead at a time pattern. And what I had done is I had gotten to the upper edge of the beads. I then included some shading. And so you can see it goes from dark green, and then there are 2 beads which are a shiny green bead, dark green bead, and then tipped with a lime green bead. Now, shading can get a lot more intricate than this, but I wanted to keep it very basic just to show the concept of how you want to blend the colors of your beads so that your design looks more natural, like how you would see it in nature, because you know, we could certainly fill this all with dark green, but nothing would really stand out. So you want to add some flavor, add some color to your beadwork, and so that is known as shading. So to continue with the filling in process, what I had done was brought my needle through this last row of beads here, and as you can see, I'm near the tip, so I'm ready to shade again. So I will take 2 of the shiny green beads and 1 of my light green beads, and bring the beads through, and it's just like doing the line work, but just staying within your pattern. And sometimes you have to just place your beads and just make sure that they lay properly. You may determine, that, geez, there's too much white space in here, maybe I need to add an extra bead, and if that's the case, do it, or remove a bead, just to make sure that it lays nicely. Now, in this demonstration, we're going with the classic way of laying your beads, that they're all just on the string, brought down, laid flat, and your needle goes through and you come up through. There's other ways of arranging your beads. You can do them sideways to really fit in more precisely, which is a lot of the beadwork that I had to do on these shoes, which is why it took so long. But for tonight, we're not doing that. That will probably be another class. So I am right at the edge here with my lime green beads. So I'm going to bring my needle down right near the lime green. Pull it down. And just like the line work, every time you bead, you need to secure it. So poke your needle up through the nearest last bead that was secured and go through that bead. There we go. Pull your needle through. And then press your needle down next to that last bead. And because I'm at the end, I'll go ahead and knot that just to make sure it stays in place. So I'll flip this over and do 2 knots right flush against the interfacing. So now to continue with my filling in process, I'm going to start right next to that lime green bead that I just secured and bring my needle up. There we go. And I'm going to, because I'm working back down, I'm going to reverse my pattern. So I'm starting off this time with 1 lime green and 2 of the shiny green beads. Pull my beads down, hold it in place, make sure that they're lined up just where I want them, and bring my needle down. And the good thing is, if your thread is a little loose, you can kind of, even if you didn't quite get your needle down where you wanted it, you can, if you're just gentle with the thread, you can kind of take your thumb and push them where you want them to be and hold it in place with your thumb, and then come up with your needle and then secure that in place. So, and that is the filling in process. You can see each line, and my goal is to get that completely filled, and then my next step will be to finish this outer edge, finish down the center, and all of the straight line work. Now I will say, I don't have a pattern drawn out here, but I want to show you, trying to find an intricate curve right here. Okay, here's a good example. So as you can see at the bottom here, we have this curve design, very intricate, and it can be tricky to get it really in place properly. And really the only way that is tricky is if you use too many beads at one time. So when I am doing any type of intricate curves, I'll decrease the amount of beads with each stitch. So instead of using 3 or 4 or 5 beads, I will drop it down to 2 beads. Now, as I'm getting even more intricate, you see in the center here, that tiny little spiral. Typically something like that, I would stitch 1 bead at a time. So it's more time intensive, but it's well worth it because you will end up with a much finer product if you do it that way. So for me, doing this really type of intricate work and these vines, or what we call sprigs, the little detail work, you can see the lightly colored beads here. It's just applying 2 beads at one time and just following along the curve pattern. And once you bead those 2 beads, then in the back, just making a double knot and then coming up and then continuing with your line or your vine process. So we can certainly do that another day as well. And just to let you know, for the next class, what I would like to do is show the edging process. As you can see on the leaf design, what I had done while Jason was sawing was I trimmed just with a little scissor. I trimmed very close, not too close. I left some interfacing on the edge, but I did trim this edge of the leaf. And once I am done outlining this side, I will trim that as well. And you do that because obviously you need to finish off your work, but also it makes it easier to bead because if you recall, my original piece of interfacing was sort of like a rectangle shape, and when you have these hard edges, your thread gets caught and it gets jumbled. So it's what I found, it's much easier to have a more rounded edges to the interfacing when you're working with a thread and needle. So after it's trimmed, then the next step would be to what we call edge it off, and that's a simple 3 bead stitch process as well. And there's all different types of edging, and I will show you one of my favorites at the next class. So, and I just also want to talk a little bit about beading because for myself, beading is not only something that I really enjoy doing and that I'm very passionate about, but it's one of those practices and techniques that really keeps me grounded. It really helps to reduce my stress level, anxiety, and it's just so rewarding to be able to create something so beautiful. You know, like I mentioned earlier, I'm not the greatest drawer or painter or anything like that, but my creativity comes out in other ways, and so and this is one of them that I really enjoy. And it's a time for me when I meditate, when I pray. You know, I just listen to good music, and you know, I'll be beading for a couple of hours and it feels like a half an hour. The time just goes by so fast, and I know you beaders out there will totally agree with me that the time really does go by fast, and it is a great stress reducer. Some people say, oh, I could never bead, I would get so stressed, and but honestly, if you give it a try, give yourself a chance, and just really take the time, you know, to get your materials, and to don't be too hard on yourself. Make it fun. You know, have your little practice projects. That's what I did when I started resuming beading. Again, I had put it down for many years, and I picked it back up again, gosh, close to 20 years ago. And I was a little, you know, I'll be honest, I was a little discouraged when I first started again. I was like, geez, you know, I've really lost some of my skills here, but I didn't give up, and I just stuck with it. And then I realized what I was doing wrong was that some of my techniques were just a little too rushed. So when I decreased the amount of beads that I strung down to 2 beads at a time, I noticed it was getting more tighter and more filled nicely and more intricate. And then I said, oh, okay, so my confidence increased, and I just went on to bigger, more elaborate projects. Just to go back to these shoes again, because earlier when I was showing them to you, I didn't mention how this process came to be. So Jason and I had never beaded shoes like this before, and we knew that we would, in order to do this, we would not, or I would not be beading directly onto the canvas itself. I just felt more comfortable because it was what I was used to doing, and this was my first pair. I said, let's just have me bead on the interfacing. We'll cut out pieces of the interfacing that matches up with the shoe. We'll draw the design onto the interfacing, and I'll just fill it in. I'll bead it, and once it's done, we'll trim it and sew it right onto the shoe. So Jason cut 3 pieces per shoe. He cut from the back a strip that went all down the side and it ends here on each side, and then what we call the toe for moccasins. Cut out that shape. I beaded it, and then he sewed it with a thick needle. It was a little tricky getting through the thickness of the shoe. Sewed those beaded panels right onto it, and then once it was done, then I just did a rolled type edging all along the inside edge here as well. And so that's how we did that. Of course, you could bead right onto the material of the shoe, freehand bead as well, and draw right onto the shoe and bead like that. And you know, if and when I decide to do another pair, then that will probably be the technique that I will use for that. So, so back to the filling in process. Once we get more to the center or completion of one little area, we probably will have to resort to the one bead at a time just to make it fit. And as you're getting, you know, down to one edge, filling in, poking your needle through, creating a knot, and then just bead up the other direction and just go up and down until your surface area is completely beaded. What a great appreciation for the craftsmanship of your work, and again, for sharing your knowledge. Myself, I'm usually in the bedroom or I'm downstairs when he's working in the studio. So I hear all of these bangs and noises going on in there, and I typically have an idea of what he's doing, but in terms of how he's creating that and the process, it is quite in depth. So thank you again. So while Jason was showing you some of the final stages of the cutting, I was here observing, and at the same time I started my edging process. Although I had not filled in the leaf, I just felt like doing it, so I started creating my edging, and I'll show you how to start that at another day. But it's basically with 3 beads. You come up through, string 3 beads, come down, and then you repeat, but with 2 beads. So that's what I'm going to show you. When I do edging around a filled in piece, I'll take a lighter shade or something more sparkly. In this case, I actually started something with darker edging because of what it's going to be placed on. So it's all your preference, but the process is the same for this particular type of edging anyway. Like I said, it's a 2 bead edging. So what I did was to continue with this process here, I placed 2 of the lime green beads, ran them down the string, and then all I simply do is take my needle, come up underneath the interfacing right along the edge next to the bead that's attached to the interfacing, pull my string, and as you can see, it just lays nicely on its own, and I take my needle and come up through that last bead that's flush against the edge of the interfacing. So I'm going to poke my needle through that last bead, and be careful, if it slips, you may need to pull the string tight and hold it in place with your fingers, and pull it through. Make sure it's tight, and it's very, very simple. Well, this was interesting. I think, and this can happen very rarely, but it did to me. So it's good it did it on camera because I can show you. I think I didn't poke enough of the interfacing, so the bead actually fell off. So that's not a big deal. Just repeat the process. So since I lost this little bead right here, I'm going to pick that up again.
So Donna, I'm gonna zoom in
Sure.
so they can actually see what you're doing a little bit closer. Let me
Sure.
see if I can zoom in here. There.
Good?
Yes.
Okay. So I poke my needle from the bottom up through the edge of the interfacing, and the needle is right next to that last bead. I'm going to pull the needle through. You can see how it just automatically lays in that pattern once you pull it tight. And I'm going to hold them in place, take my needle, bring it through the last bead, and there it's secured. 2 beads at a time. I'll do it one more time. I'll pick up 2 beads.
And I'm going to try to get a little closer so people can see. Yeah, beautiful.
Good.
Yes.
And before I attach these last 2 beads of this edging, I do want to make sure and let everybody know that if you had difficulty seeing, or you just wanted more explanation on a certain process, please just leave a comment on this video, and Jason and I will get back to you ASAP, hopefully by sometime tomorrow. But we will get back to you to answer any questions that you have. And like I said, the next time we go live together, I can show some of the more intricate patterns as well. So to finish this edging here for tonight, since Jason has zoomed in, I strung 2 of the lime green edging beads. I'm taking my needle, coming up underneath the interfacing along the outer edge of my vine, pulling it up through, and there's the beads. They just naturally fall into place.
Can you tip it sideways so they can see? Yep, there you
And I'm going to go down this last bead here. It's a little tricky for me to see with the lighting and tipping this and see it's getting caught. I told you about that outer edge. It's best to have it rounded. It's so much easier, but so there we go. And that's the edging. So that's what it'll look like all the way around once this has been fully beaded. Some of you beadwork artists out there, experts out there, you can probably feel me when I say sometimes you're beading late at night. You might actually fall asleep while beading. I've caught myself doing that. Just be careful. Make sure you have good lighting. It's really important. Or if you're getting too tired, it's really can be dangerous if you fall asleep while beading. I've actually also, in a hurry, beaded the edge of my thumb. So be careful. And I only made that mistake once, and I'll never do it again. So I'm very, when I mentioned earlier about being grounded when I bead and very focused, ever since that incident, even though sometimes I might bead a little bit in a hurry, I'm still very mindful of the needle and my movements to prevent any injury. And really, just be careful and take your time and just have fun with it.